Okay, hello everyone. We are getting ready to start our Bible study as we continue our look at Daniel, which will lead us up into Revelations. And waiting till we get connected in with everything. Okay. Glad you could join us for tonight's Bible study. As we continue along with the look at the book of Daniel, and then, of course, right into Revelations. That's what we're going to be doing for a while. And kind of last week, we gave you a little bit of a preview of Daniel, and then talked about King Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, which then Daniel interpreted for him. And then, of course, as we know, he was able to be moved up, him and his friends, then moved up into more power as into the Babylonian culture, because they had been captured from their home and taken to Babylon, and now they're making their way up the ladder, you might say, in the world of Babylon. So that's been going on for a little bit. And then tonight, again, we'll look at Daniel. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 4 events in Daniel's life that we can learn something from, okay? And to do that, we'll be looking at chapters 1, chapters 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. Now, for the most part, chapters 1 and 2 is what we talked about last week. We're just going to do a little review about that. And then chapter 3 is what we're going to start things off with, because it is in chapter 3 and in chapter 4 that the first 2 episodes or events in Daniel's life that we can learn from happen. Chapter 5, there's one other, and then in chapter 6, there's another event. So each of these events in Daniel's life lead us kind of and help us in a way to see what is going to be talked about in the book of Revelations. So that is how we're going to do this. So just kind of a review. Last week, chapter 1 was the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, and that talked about how Daniel and his 3 friends who were Jewish were in captivity, and they were training in the Babylonian palace, and they're doing well. Then in chapter 2 was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and in his dream, the king sees a great statue made of gold, silver, brass, iron, and clay, which is then destroyed by a stone hitting the feet of the statue and turning it to dust, which then is blown away. Daniel comes forward to discern the dream and interpret it, and from historical records we know that he was correct. The golden head was the kingdom of Babylon. The silver chest and arms were the Medo-Persian Empire. The brass belly and hips was the Greek Empire, and the iron legs and feet mixed with iron and clay were the Roman Empire. The stone was Christ and his church that appeared during the Roman period, and of course eventually grew to cover the earth, while all of the other kingdoms before it have been crushed and have disappeared from the world scene. From this point on, Daniel and his 3 friends are given a high position in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. So that's kind of where we're at. We went through those 2 chapters, and tonight we're going to start and talk about 3 other chapters. And then what happened in those 3 chapters were events in Daniel's life. Okay, so this part is in chapter 3. All right, in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. And what we'll be reading from is chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 here in a little bit. According to the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament, this first event that we're going to talk about with Daniel took place in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, after Daniel had been in Babylon about 18 years. This was the same year that Nebuchadnezzar returned to Jerusalem a second time in order to burn it down and destroy their temple. It is interesting that Daniel did not appear in this event. Here are the first 7 verses in chapter 3 in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, along with the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sounds of the musical instruments, they all fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now, some claim that Nebuchadnezzar got the idea of this statue from that first dream he had. Making and refurbishing public shrines and statues were part of the king's duty in those days. Dura is an unknown site of the Babylonian Flat River area. Archaeologists have found very large pedestals that could have been the base of the statue, and the idea was to put it in the flatlands so it could be seen from afar, gleaming in the sunlight. It had a 9-foot base and then about a 90-foot high statue. The king was to use the unveiling of the statue as an opportunity to test the loyalty and submissiveness of his court and ministers. He calls and tells them to bow down, and they do. Now, this is a problem for Daniel and his 3 friends because this would be a violation of their faith, because they do not want to appease the king, because if they do, they'd be sinning against God. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to do this, and their detractors accuse all 4 of these men of insubordination to the king. The king is furious, but because they have served him well, he permits them to explain themselves, and they tell the king that their confidence is in God to save them, and whether he does so or not does not matter. They will not do this. So the king demanded that they all be thrown into a large brick kiln heated to the maximum. That would not even leave any ashes of their body. The king observes, though, that they are joined by a 4th person, and that fire was not affecting them at all. So when they are released, Nebuchadnezzar decrees that the religion of these men become a protected religion and rewards the 3 again with even higher positions. And what we can learn from this first event of Daniel is that whether God heals us or not, whether he answers our prayers or not, whether he gives us prosperity or not, he is still God. And he deserves our trust, he deserves our obedience, he deserves our praise. We all have a chance to witness for Jesus Christ. Everybody has a chance to show to the people their faith, even if it is not as dramatic as this, of course. It's not always life or death, but it is always a chance to confess Jesus Christ and share what he has given you with others. And another thing that this event tells us is that God is always with us, right? Even if it seems sometimes he's let us down, that he is always, always with us. Okay, so that's the first event. And the second event is in chapter 4 of Daniel. And there's no verses we're going to read. We're just going to summarize the whole chapter because this is about Nebuchadnezzar's madness and his recovery. So in this fourth chapter, Nebuchadnezzar recounts the events of his madness and recovery. He has a dream where a great tree is present, and it's cut down to a stump. And Daniel tells him that that tree represents him, and that because of his pride, his sanity will be taken away from him, and he will have the mind of an animal for 7 periods, so about 3.5 years, because they only counted summer and winter. Daniel appeals to the king to repent of his sins and do good deeds so he wouldn't be punished by God. Well, apparently the king doesn't do any of that. And a year later, as he is walking on the roof of his palace, contemplating his own achievements and greatness, patting himself on the back, he is struck with madness. And the Babylonians believed that madness was a form of divine madness. There are inscriptions by Nebuchadnezzar that have been found, thousands of large bricks that tell of all his great victories and works, and they were used to construct buildings. One of his writings mentions a period of 4 years where he did no public works and where he did not delight in his kingdom. With time, he recognizes that he was sinning, and he acknowledges that God is the true ruler of the world, and this does include kings. And after this realization and repenting, he is restored to health and of his position and splendor. It is interesting to trace the progression of Nebuchadnezzar's faith, beginning with that fierce pagan proud ruler. After Daniel interprets his original dream, he acknowledges that God is stronger than all the gods. After the furnace, he declares that worship to this powerful God is okay and should be protected. And after this second dream and his recovery from madness, he himself now worships God and declares him to be eternal, all-powerful, and sovereign. He actually now believes in God. And that's a good lesson for us who are discouraged about how our faith journey goes. Sometimes we kind of fall into these 3 areas where we believe in God. We know he's stronger than all gods, but we're not really ready to put our trust and follow him. And then he becomes, we know that it's okay to practice the belief in God. And then, of course, we kind of put our trust and everything into God. So it's kind of like a progression that it did for Nebuchadnezzar. We sometimes can do that too. Now, let's go to the third event that we can learn from. This is going to be in chapter 5 in the book of Daniel. And again, I think we just summarize what goes on in that whole chapter there. Yep, okay. So we're going to fast forward to the very last night of the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel has now been there for 70 years. Nebuchadnezzar has long gone, and a man named Nabonidus has inherited the rule of the kingdom. But since he would prefer other pursuits, he hands his throne to Belshazzar, his son. And Belshazzar decides to organize a lavish feast in his own honor, and as the food, and especially the wine, is flowing, he demands that the vessels that were taken from the temple in Jerusalem be brought out for display and common usage for their party. This, of course, is a sacrilege, and it was done out of pride and with the purpose of showing how powerful the Babylonians were, having destroyed the temple of the Jews and their God. So while this was going on, a man's hand appeared and began to write on the wall opposite them. Now this frightened the king, and so he called on his wise men to interpret the writing on the wall, promising them the third highest position in the kingdom for the one who could do it. His father was the overall king, but Belshazzar was the one on the throne, and then the third most important person would be whoever can help them with these writings. Now, they couldn't do it, so Daniel was brought in to solve the mystery. Now, he doesn't want the reward, but he does interpret the message, and before he does so, however, he reminds Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's experiences with God and the lessons that Nebuchadnezzar learned, lessons which Belshazzar has refused to learn and which have brought him to this point. Now, the inscription was a series of symbols for Aramaic weights and measures, a mina, a shekel, and fractions. So the word interpretation, numbered, weighed, fractions. The literal interpretation, God has numbered your kingdom and is going to put it to an end. God has weighed you in the balance, and you have been found wanting. Your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, Belshazzar is disturbed by this, but still offers the honor to Daniel and declares Daniel to be the third ruler of the kingdom. What's interesting is that inscriptions found by archaeologists tell us that this took place in the year 539 BC. That night, now remember this is the night where the Babylonian reign ends. That night, the Medes, led by Darius, which was one of Cyrus's commanders, diverted the flow of the Euphrates and led by 2 Babylonian deserters, marched their army under the walls along the dry riverbed. They captured the city without a battle, while the king and the leaders were too drunk. Darius reigned for about 2 years, while Cyrus was fighting other battles in the north, and then eventually Cyrus came to claim the rule of Babylon. So one good lesson for us from this episode is that we should be careful to learn from the mistakes of the past. Belshazzar was defeated because he refused to honor God or apply any of the lessons from the past to his present life. Okay, that brings us now to episode number 4. And the event that happens here is in chapter 6. And this one is one that we're kind of aware of because we probably, for some of us anyway, learned it in Sunday school. And those of us who are still learning, this is a great event in Daniel's life that again shows us who God really is. So this is in the 6th chapter of Daniel, and again, it's just we're just going to summarize that chapter. Daniel, perhaps because he had prophesied concerning their victory, is now placed with 2 others in cabinet positions over the 120 governors who would rule over the entire nation. This position and his superior abilities provoked jealousy among the other ministers and governors, and they want him out. So they devise a plan to attack him on his religious beliefs and practices, which are different than their own. So their strategy was to create a law which in effect made the king the supreme high priest for a month. And this would show his authority in every dimension because no prayer, no petition, no religious function could be performed without his blessing for that certain period of time. Now, the plot was then to accuse Daniel of defying this law because Daniel had a daily habit of prayer. The law was punishable by death, and under Persian custom, royal decrees could not be changed nor exceptions be made. Of course, Daniel is once again faced with the decision of honoring God or forfeiting his position and his life. And there were lions that were kept by the Persian kings for sport. They would hunt and kill them on royal land to demonstrate their sovereignty over man and beast. Daniel, now about 90 years old, is placed in the den of lions. And of course, he comes out unharmed. And this pleases the king because he respected Daniel and he realized the plot too late to change anything. So after Daniel is removed from the den, the ministers and the governors who participated in the plot and their families are replaced and put in the lions' dens. They were all executed. And the 6th chapter ends with Darius glorifying God and rewarding Daniel like Nebuchadnezzar before him. So we have reviewed 4 events in Daniel's life that showed him and his friends' faith and courage, and God rescuing them over and over again, and the pagan kings being brought to faith or punished by a king who was demonstrated as being greater than they. All this happened to affect several people. Daniel and his friends were vindicated by their faith in God. The kings and leaders in Babylon came to know and honor the true God, who raises up kings and kingdoms and has the power to destroy them and their idols. The Jews who were in Babylonian captivity saw their city and the temple where God dwelled destroyed and overrun by pagans. They had to put up with the boast of their captors that the power of their gods was greater than the power of the God of the Jews. And their captivity and destruction of Jerusalem was, of course, pretty convincing proof. However, through Daniel's life and the very high-profile events that we have gone through, God was able to help his people maintain their faith despite their defeats. God was still in charge. God was still working in their lives as well as in the lives of their captors. In this way, the Jews, while they were in captivity, were able to maintain the spirit and practice of their religion. Hopefully that those 4 events, we see how important they are and how they are important to us yet today, because it shows us who God truly is. You know, that God, if we put our faith in God, that we agree to follow God, will get us through the times of struggles, pain, loss, that God will never leave us. We sometimes are the ones who turn our back on God, but God will never turn our backs, his back on us, as long as we put our faith in him. And we see over and over again Daniel and his friends doing that, putting their faith in God's hands and God leading them through all these things. So next week, we're going to continue looking at the last part of the book of Daniel. And that's the 4 visions of Daniel's prophecies, because he prophesizes how everything's going to happen in the next 600 years, okay? So in chapter 7, in the first vision, Daniel sees the same kingdoms, but this time he sees them as beasts. Remembering, this avoids confusion. So in chapter 7, again, this is just a quick summary because we'll go deeper into each of these chapters, but in chapter 7, he kind of attaches a beast to the empires. Babylon, the lion, Medo-Persia, bears, Greece, leopards, Rome, a terrible beast, and of course the kingdom of God being the Lord and saints. In chapter 8, we'll talk more about the second and third kingdoms and their struggle for power, the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greeks. And Daniel describes the victory of the Greeks over the Persian Empire. Chapter 9 is more of a prophecy than a vision. In that chapter, Daniel recognizes that the captivity of the Jews, predicted to be for 70 years, is finally over, and he prays and urges their return based on Jeremiah's prophecy. He also makes a prophecy about the future duration of the Jewish nation in terms of 70 weeks, and so we'll examine that in a historical perspective. Chapter 10, an angel appears to Daniel and prepares him for more visions to come. And then chapter 11, the chapter predicts events that will take place between the rise and the fall of the Greek and the Roman empires. Chapter 12, the final chapter, summarizes the conflict between the last great world power and the kingdom of God and the church. And Daniel correctly sees the victory of the saints after much persecution by the fourth kingdom, that being the kingdom of Rome. So we will try to go through those chapters. We'll talk about chapter 7 next week, and as far as we can go into those final chapters, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Probably won't get them all in next week. as we continue to summarize them. We're taking our time. It gets to be kind of sometimes confusing when we see all these visions and symbols, and we will talk about that next week. Okay, so kind of if you want to kind of go through those chapters, read them. Jot down notes because you might have some questions, and again, you're always welcome to put up a question on Facebook, or if you'd like on the chat, or just email. That's always a good thing. Just in our emails, texts, however you want to do it, questions you can throw at me. And there'll be a lot of questions as we go on through this process, because especially in chapter 9, because these visions and symbols start to become more and more. And of course, in the book of Revelations, there's full of symbols. And I think, again, we'll clarify that and go into that a little bit more. So next week, we'll start with chapter 7. We'll see how far we get. Maybe get 7 and 8 in next week, and then just continue to build up. Because then when we get through with the book of Daniel, we'll turn our attention to the book of Revelations, and hopefully because of Daniel, a lot of this stuff will make sense to us, even though I don't believe that anyone ever will make total sense out of the book of Revelations. But we try, we study it, and I think we learn something more and more every time we look at it. So, all right, we want to thank you for joining us. I know that as you're watching this live, there's been a lot of storms in the central northern area, just north of us, actually, out here, that we're going to have an active evening. So I pray that everybody will be safe, and that we get through. But we need moisture, so we'll pray we get some rain. So we'll ask God to send His blessings upon us this evening, that He provides us with some moisture, and we pray that He'll keep everyone safe on this evening. We pray that you all remain safe in the days ahead, and we look forward to doing this again next Wednesday night. A reminder that we do meet in person at 9 o'clock Mountain Time, 10 o'clock Central Time at the Paxton United Methodist Church every Wednesday morning. And then here again live. Of course, you can watch this anytime you want here on our HSP Parish website or over on Facebook. They also keeps a record of that for now anyway. And you can view it on there whenever it becomes available, or it's a little better for you if you're a very busy person. So we just want you to have the opportunity to watch it whenever you can. If you have questions, again, feel free to send them to us. And then next week we'll post our email addresses. We'll post, usually I can view chat on the website, but it keeps logging me out, so I'll have to get that all figured out, and then I'll be able to answer anything on chat. And on Facebook, sometimes you can ask questions too, and it seems like that sometimes I get, there we go, we get booted out. Thank you for the prayers of the storms, and that yes, and I know you all need rain wherever you're at right now. There needs to be some moisture that we need in all these areas across the state. So my prayer is for that wherever you are at. And again, have a blessed and great evening. Take care.